Hello and welcome back to Bitesize Boxing. So first things first, I just want to say I'm sorry that I've been MIA for the last 10 days or so. If you can't tell from my voice, I've been down with flu for about a week, so I've been completely out of action in bed. And really and truly, this is the first time I felt well enough to even do any kind of video, which is, it's been a bit of a shame really, because traction-wise, the channel was doing brilliantly. I think one of our Inoue videos got about 2k views in the end, something like that. Loads of interaction, loads of subs off the back of that. And we have unfortunately lost a few subs because people subbed on as a result of that video, 10 days, 2 weeks ago. And then they're waiting for me to say and post something, and then I go missing. So sorry about that. As you can hear, my voice is still really not there, but it's good enough. We can get through some stuff. So of course as well, Sod's Law, the last 10 days or so has been news pretty much every single day, whereas for the 3 weeks or 4 weeks prior to that, I was really struggling for content because there was nothing to talk about. I fall ill, news goes mad, Sod's Law. Anyway, let's talk about Moses Itauma again, a guy who I've spoken about on this channel at length. It does feel like this channel turned into the Moses Itauma channel a little bit, but that being said, there has been some interesting news in the last couple of days. That is that he will be facing one of either potentially Michael Hunter or David Adeleye in December. Now, I actually think this is an interesting next step. I'd obviously previously speculated about the potential of a Filip Hrgović fight, which I'd maintained I thought would be quite a risky fight, but of course Hrgović did sustain a cut in that fight. He does seem to cut quite badly, in the Adeleye fight that is, and so that's essentially ruled him out against Itauma. So, Hunter or Adeleye, I've listened to various people's takes on this, these two potential matchups, and for me it's an interesting one. If this was a prime Michael Hunter is an incredibly difficult fighter on his day. I think he is a very tricky fighter. Let's not forget he gave Usyk, obviously down at cruiserweight, one of his hardest ever fights. He took the O of Martin Bakole. You know, he, I think, was very hard done by, or at least quite unlucky in that fight against Povetkin not to get the nod. So Michael Hunter is a good fighter at a good level, at least in his prime. Unfortunately, he's made some very strange decisions in his career. He turned down a fight against Hrgović to go in the direction of Triller and to sign with Triller, who essentially were almost like a TikTok kind of app thing, which would put on comedy fights and stuff like that with Snoop Dogg commentating and all this kind of thing. It was like YouTuber crossover kind of thing, and he signed with them rather than taking a world title eliminator, which was strange. Of course, it was clearly a financial decision, but if he'd got through that Hrgović fight, which in my opinion I think he probably would have done at that time, he then earns multi-millions in a world title fight, and given the ability I think Michael Hunter had, I think stood a good chance. But decided to go in this weird Triller route. Of course, as a surprise to none of us, Triller amounted to nothing, and I don't think he ended up really getting much out of that deal. He ended up spending about 5 years or so out in the wilderness, and we've heard nothing from Michael Hunter since. Now Michael Hunter is nearly 40, he's 37 years old, I think turning 38 next year. And where does it leave him? He's had a string of performances that have kind of been much of a muchness, and I'm just going through it now. It's been Cassius Chaney, who he beat on points, who is a middling American domestic heavyweight. It's not really anything to write home about. A slew of journeymen and a split decision draw, which, let's be honest, I think he lost, against Jerry Forrest, who was a guy who he handily beat earlier on in his career. So for me, Michael Hunter has clearly fallen off the wagon. He, of course, split up with longtime trainer Hasim Ratman as well, who always trainer and manager Hasim Ratman. And you would say at the point at which he split up with Hasim Ratman had not just done a good job on the training front, but also guided Michael Hunter in quite a good direction. So for Michael Hunter to, split up with Hasim Ratman, the direction his career's gone in, he's been fighting in obscurity in these weird small casino shows in America and club shows in Mexico. So again, Moses Itauma versus Michael Hunter, it's an interesting fight, but for me, Michael Hunter has clearly fallen off to such an extent now that I don't think it would necessarily be all that competitive. And if it is, it's a shame, because for me, Michael Hunter had so much talent when he was in his early 30s to see him now at nearly 40 getting thrown in there against a prospect, I don't think we're going to get to see the best of Michael Hunter. And something else as well, I'd say, and look, this is quite common for fighters who age. If you look at Michael Hunter's body composition now, he looks physically incredibly different. Even though his weights aren't drastically different, he's still in the 2 teens for a lot of his fights. I mean, he was 218 as recently as last year. If you look at Michael Hunter at, say, 218 in 2024, and Michael Hunter in, say, I don't know, 218, 215, 217, whatever, in, say, 2017, 2018, he looks physically like a completely different human being. So his body has aged clearly, you can see it. The body fat composition is well off now compared to what it used to be. You know, he used to be just over cruiserweight, he still had some definition there. Now he looks very fleshy at the same kind of weight. So an aged fighter. Does it really do much for Moses Itauma? I'm not sure it does. You know, as I say, if this is the Michael Hunter of a few years ago, that's a good scalp to have on your resume, and I think that's a really good win. At this point, you're fighting a near, 40-year-old man who's been out in the wilderness for half a decade, so I don't really care too much for it. David Adeleye. Now, David Adeleye, this is a fight that I've heard some people completely pan. Dell on Blue Collar Sports TV, he was saying that he hates this fight. For me, I actually don't. I think David Adeleye is an interesting proposition. I've heard him referred to as, just a left hook and that's it. And I think to some extent that is fair. But for me, David Adeleye brings with him certain characteristics that would at least make a fight with Moses Itauma interesting. For starters, David Adeleye, of course, can punch very hard with that left hook. Yes, he's very limited. No, he hasn't had the amateur schooling, especially compared to someone like Hunter, for example. Hunter is a lot more schooled, a lot more polished. But David Adeleye has that youth, that ignorance of youth as well in the way that he fights. And when you watch David Adeleye, he fights with heart, he fights with ambition, which is something that I'm not sure we would get from Michael Hunter, not just because of the age, but also in terms of his career decisions. I'm not saying that it necessarily has manifested itself in the ring, because you look at, for example, that Povetkin fight earlier in his career. Hunter looked ambitious in the ring, but his outside of the ring decisions aren't ambitious. So if you were to throw him in there against a guy like Itauma and he's getting worked over, I can see a world in which Hunter goes, I'm nearly 40, I haven't really cared about this for a long time. I think even Hunter said he does this because he's good at it, not because he loves it. Whereas a guy like David Adeleye, yes, you can see a world in which he gets taken apart by Itauma, but he goes out swinging. And that's something I would much rather want to see, For someone like Adeleye, Adeleye has the potential athleticism to be able to time someone like Itauma coming in with his attacks. And then if he does, we get to see a bit more about what Itauma's about. So for me, I would much prefer the David Adeleye fight. Again, I think Adeleye is a far more limited heavyweight than Michael Hunter. But Adeleye for me has intangibles that I don't think Hunter has at this point. As I say, I think that against both guys, I think Itauma would win, to be honest, and I would make him quite a sizable favourite over either of these guys. But for me, Moses Itauma would have his work cut out with someone like David Adeleye, in as much of as long as David Adeleye is going to be in there, he is going to be giving it everything he's got. As I say, he's got that ignorance of youth, he's got that athleticism as well. He's very quick with that hair trigger left hook. And as I say, he's not the most technically gifted. I don't think you can ever really make much out of David Adeleye in terms of building him up beyond much more of what he is. I think he kind of is what he is at this point. I think it'll be difficult to kind of work on him and polish him up any further. But that being said, I still think from an entertainment point of view, and even in terms of a building point of view, someone like Adeleye is a good stepping stone for Itauma, because he will be, he's not going to have it all his own way. I don't see a world in which David Adeleye just lies down early, even if he gets dropped, even if he gets hurt. As long as he's in there, he's going to give it his all, and he's going to provide us with a test at least, which someone like Dillian Whyte was just unable to give us. Dillian Whyte got hit on the chin once, that's it, goodbye, good night. We're not going to get that from David Adeleye. And even against Michael Hunter, I don't think we would get that, but there is every chance that he gets hit with a stiff jab in the first round and thinks, nah, I don't think so. Or because he's been out in the wilderness for so long and he's aging, the punch resistance could be completely gone anyway. So we're not going to get that with Adeleye. So for me, that would be my preference. And I don't think it's a terrible fight, to be honest. But you let me know what you think. I've waffled on long enough. Apologies for the voice. I've just about got through this video, so I'll leave it there. Take it easy, guys. Cheers.